I'm joined today by Brian Larkin, CEO of United Oil and Gas, who have announced this week a 2-year extension to their high impact Walter Morant license in Jamaica, which has a potential 9 billion barrels of oil. In addition, the company have announced that a potential farming partner discussions are advancing. Thanks for joining me, Brian.
Thanks, Darren. Good morning.
Good morning. So Brian, we've spoken before. I know quite a bit about United Oil and Gas, but perhaps for any new investors or potential investors listening, you could just give us a brief overview of the company.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. United Oil and Gas, we're an Irish company. We have a UK stock exchange listing, so we're quoted on the AIM market. We have our core asset, which is Jamaica, which we have a big exploration project. It's about 22 and a half square kilometers of acreage. It's about the same size as the North Sea, so it's colossal in size. We have 100% of that, and we're the operator. And we also have an onshore legacy UK asset.
Okay. So obviously Jamaica's a focal point at the moment, and obviously that's what we're talking about in terms of your announcement this week in terms of the license extension and the farming partner discussions. Before we talk about Jamaica, can we sort of rewind a little bit back to Egypt, which I think might be fair to say was a bit of a thorn in United's side. I think,
Yeah.
if correct me if I'm wrong, but you bought the Abu Sanan concession from Rockhopper a few years back. Things seem to be going quite well. You were drilling, you were making further discoveries and increasing the barrels of oil output. And then things seem to go a little bit pear-shaped, whereby you exited the business. Can you tell us why that was and some background there?
Yeah, well, I think torn on my side is an understatement. It was more like a pickaxe driven in by a sledgehammer. We had a horrid couple of years. There's no question about that, and make no mistakes about it. It was very tough going, but some time has now passed since that, and it's only really now I start to like actually feel like I can actually talk about it because I think I'll have PTSD. If you go back 3 years ago, the asset was performing really well for us. In fact, everything we seemed to touch turned to oil. And back then, I think I used the phrase that it was the gift that kept on giving because it was. But, ultimately what transpired, the war in Ukraine broke out. There was a vacuum of US dollar in the region. Now, there hadn't, we'd been paid in Egyptian pounds previous to that. And that had never really been an issue for us because we could translate Egyptian pounds to US dollars fairly easily. But once that vacuum occurred, we couldn't actually source US dollar anymore. The Egyptian economy went into free fall, which resulted in, I think, 3 or 4 devaluations of the Egyptian pound against the dollar. So I think at one point we were nearly writing off, for every $1 million of revenue, I think we were writing off nearly 3 or 400,000 in FX losses down the toilet,
Right.
never to be recovered. And clearly that's not sustainable.
Yeah.
We were literally writing off millions a year in FX hit. So we made the decision to actually exit the business. The asset had also got into a stage of maturity where we felt that we'd taken as much value as we could off the table. So we decided to sell the asset. We had a deal agreed to divest it to the operator. Again, I can talk a bit more freely about it now, but at the time, the deal was agreed, all the heads were in place, but the closing mechanisms that were inserted into the sale and purchase agreement by the buyer were a violation of UK law. And our UK lawyers advised us that we couldn't sign it. We ultimately offered the buyer several alternative closing mechanisms, and they rejected all one of them. And ultimately, they decided that unless we signed that SPA, they were going to default us, which is ultimately what happened. And as a board, we could have challenged that default, but we would have spent years trying to challenge it. We would have had the same outcome. It would have cost shareholders millions that we didn't have, and we were putting the wider group at risk. And at all costs, we had to keep Jamaica. Jamaica was always the jewel in the crown, and we had to do everything we could to protect that. So ultimately, we had to take significant pain, and like there is no other way of explaining it. It was absolute torture. But that was then. This is now. There's light at the end of the tunnel, and we're getting closer and closer to that light, thankfully. But it's definitely been a tough couple of years for us.
Mm. Okay, well, you mentioned obviously Jamaica there being the sort of, if you like, the light at the end of the tunnel, the jewel in the ground, whatever. Jamaica itself then. So, I mean, that's also seemed a little bit stop-start. You, I think you announced last year that you had potential farming partners in the data room, and that seemed, positive, and that something was going to come to fruition there. And then I think just before Christmas, you announced that those discussions were suspended. So people were like, "What? You've just said this and said that." Um, and then we see an RNS this week saying that you've extended the license for another 2 years, which is obviously good news, and that you've got those potential farming partners that you were previously talking to back in the data room, and potentially some new ones as well. Now, I know that they're under NDA, so you can't go into too much details about who they are. Um, but I guess if you were a skeptic investor in United Oil and Gas, or an existing investor in United Oil and Gas that's still got their shares, why is this different this time? Can we be more confident that there's a way forwards with Jamaica and these discussions?
Yeah, well, if I answer that two parts of that question or
Mm,
comment you made. The first one is yes, it has been stop start. The reason it's been stop start is because on more than one occasion, on two occasions, we were very close to having a deal agreed. And in
right.
fact, we had announced that we had preferred parties or partners identified, and we were in discussions with them. Those partners signed off technically and commercially on the project, but at the 11th hour, both had changed strategies. That happened 18 months ago. It happened again last year, the tail end of last year. That was really, really frustrating for us, having gone down so far down a road and spent quite a lot of time bringing parties through the data room process. The conversations were suspended before Christmas with a small number of parties. Those conversations have re-engaged. We've also right now got more parties in the data room than we've ever had in the data room at any one point. Um, the license expires January 2026, and given that we're in March, we decided, or like ordinarily in previous years, we would have gone for the extension later in the phase. So we would have gone maybe in November to apply for an extension. But we decided that, why wait? We're going to need it anyway. Let's just try and get
Mm.
it. And
Yeah,
as
that was
well as
another question. That was another thing I was well, we're going to ask you was that you'd actually extended that license January last year for 2 years, and then you re-extended it for another 2 years, but you had another year left in play, or say just under a year. And that was a question I was going to ask you, but it sounds like you've answered that. You may as well have done it because you needed to do it anyway.
Yeah, like, look, we've been wrapped up in the permitting process in order to do the core. So there's a current work program we want to do, which is a piston core and survey, which is basically going out, putting a vessel to sea, taking samples close to where the oil seeps are to check for the presence and migration of hydrocarbons. It's not a particularly expensive piece of work, but it needs quite a lot of permitting. We've been tied up in permitting on that now for over a year. Um, and it's not anything that's insurmountable. It's just taking time. Uh, the fault of that doesn't particularly lie with anybody either. It's kind of this piece of permitting has fallen between two stools. We've also historically, we've had to kind of we've had our PLC based in London, but we've had a UK or sorry, a Jamaican entity
Mm.
in country. Well, we've had to change that structure as well to fit with the permitting. So it's been quite a drawn out process. Ultimately, the conversation I had with the ministry, I was in Kingston a month ago, was look, we've gone through all this permitting. Even if we got the permitting today, we're running up against hurricane season. It's going to be difficult to complete the work program in time to evaluate the results of that work and to give a potential partner or even ourselves time to understand the results. Therefore, we're going to need an extension. And rather than me wait until the end of the year to secure that, I think we should do it now. And it
And
sends
that,
a
yeah.
message to potential partners that we've got security of tenure. But more importantly, and this is a crucial message that I don't want our shareholders to miss this, the Jamaican government are right behind us.
Right.
They're clearly supporting us. They're up to date on our process and where we're at, and they've got confidence to grant us a further extension in order to work through the farm out process, but also work through and navigate the permitting, which has been which hasn't been easy. But the results of that really, where it's left us is that work program, rather than being completed over a 12-month window, we've now 2.5 years to complete that work program, which means the cost of it is spread out even further, which makes the capital investment even more attractive to potential partners. And
Yeah.
it takes a lot of financial pressure off United. So our kind of plan moving forward, and I know you're going to ask me about this, will be our next question, I'm sure. So what's the next steps? But the next steps now is to really get the permitting over the line. We'll wrap up this work program as part of our farm down efforts. So the cost of this work program, we're going to include that in the farm down conversations, and seek funding for that via the farm out. But look, it has been stop start. It's been stop start because more than twice we thought we were there, um, and we weren't. Unfortunately, at the 11th hour, the counterparties withdrew because of change in strategies, which has happened because everything we do is in the backdrop of the industry, right?
Yeah.
And it's been clearly, such a global shift away from exploration, an unrealistic approach and expectation on energy transition. But I know, I'm sure, your viewers will have seen BP's announcement 2 or 3 weeks ago where they basically cut their green energy budget to allocate
Yeah.
it back to oil and gas. The change in US administration has made a colossal shift in sentiment, and there are US companies in our data room right now that weren't there a year ago, and that's
Yeah,
clearly the
it sounds like the green energy transition is trying to run too fast. Everyone wants it. We know that it's a
best.
good thing long term, but
Yeah,
the reality of the situation is we need fossil fuels.
yeah,
And we've got a dire state in the North Sea now where we've got no investment going into the North Sea. And I think that's that's not right. But yeah, as you say, I think companies certainly like BP, and I think Shell even said that they were, pulling back some budget from their, green energy interests, if you like. And companies are still going to need to find oil, oil and gas. And obviously, Jamaica is sort of one of the, if you like, sort of, not discovered or explored frontier exploration places, you say. Yeah, so I agree with you on that, and yeah, yeah,
yeah. Well, look, energy. There's no question about it. The energy mix needs to evolve towards more greener fuels, and energy transition has to happen. But we have to be realistic about the timeline to deliver that. you know, and clearly we can't just turn off oil and gas today, because if we did, none of us would be getting on airplanes. We couldn't heat our homes. It has to be an evolution rather than a revolution. And certainly, the companies have, I think the large cap companies, and they dictate the pace by and large. But BP, Shells of this world are saying, well, actually, look, we've clearly gone way too fast down this line. The infrastructure isn't there, let alone the capability. And we're losing shareholder value and energy and
mm,
everything else that comes with it by ignoring frontier exploration. And there's certain things you need in order to get a farm out. You need the right time, the right environment. You need some luck, and that's why it's critical for a company like United to stay in the game for as long as we can until those stars align for us. And my sense is they're almost there in their alignment. But Jamaica, and what's interesting with the change in US administration, and this was part of my pitch. I was in Houston a month ago as well, pitching and talking to some US companies. Jamaica's in their backyard. It's 600 miles south of Miami. Now, Trump is talking about drill, baby, drill, but he's also putting pressure on foreign governments to incentivize exploration in their waters. For
yeah,
example, I know he's spoken to the UK government, and I know he's putting them under pressure for the North Sea and his profit tax, and to make things easier to produce hydrocarbons and energy. We have a project in their back garden. Like, we're 600 miles south of Miami, sitting on potentially 7 billion barrels of volume, recoverable volume, prospective resources. Um, you know, the project we have in our hands is huge in scale. It's in a what's the word I'm looking for? Geopolitical safe environment.
mm,
It's close to infrastructure. There's two refineries on the island. There's refinery and offtake facilities in Trinidad. The development concept is reasonably straightforward and remarkably cheap. It's about $8 a barrel in terms of the economics, and we're 600 miles south of the US.
Yeah. Okay, so you've got as you said previous partners in farming potential partners in the data room, and you've got some new ones around the table.
Yeah.
What could a potential deal look like for United if one of those was to come in and sign on the dotted line, which it sounds like you were close to before? Would it be something like they take some project equity and give you a cash advance? Would it be they give you some cash and say free carry the drill, or could it be any or all of the above?
It could be any or all of the above. And to be honest, the one thing and the only one thing I want is the best possible deal we can get for our shareholders. The big takeaway about having companies in the process before, and term sheets were exchanged and terms were discussed with those parties. So we had a flavour of what a deal would have looked like, but that was last year. Sentiments changed. This is
Mm,
this year, and conversations before Christmas. Well, it's a slightly different world 4 or 5 months later with Trump having his feet under the table. So I'm not necessarily sure that they're the same type of terms we'd be talking now that we were talking at the back end of last year. But the positives, the real positive is that we've had large scale multinational companies, household names, go through a data room process with us, technically sign off commercially and technically on the project, and go down a road so far as to almost do a deal with us. Like, that's really encouraging because it means the rocks stack up and the commercials stack up, and it gives us confidence. There are, as I've said, there is more people right now in the data room than we've ever had before. Now, we announced this week that there's multiple parties in the data room. I can't just say that. I have to back that up for our nomad. So I got to
yeah,
give evidence that there is actually multiple
yeah,
parties in the data room, and there is. There's more now than there's ever been. We will take the best deal, and we will try and make the best deal that we can get work for our shareholders. And I don't want to prejudice any of that by saying anything that may weaken our hand. But we are, in my view, in the best position we've been in so far with the project. It's 2 years on top of the current term, don't forget. It's not just a 2 year extension from today,
oh
it's
right, okay,
on top of the current term. So we've still got, 9 months on the current term, and then we've 2 years additional on top of that.
right,
We can spread the work program out now rather than over 9 months, but over call it 2.5 years for the ease of maths, which makes any capital commitment by any potential partner far more palatable as well. We're
yeah,
not asking for a chunk of cash up front or a chunk of cash over 6 to 9 months. It's
mm,
going to be over 2.5 years potentially.
yeah,
Although if anybody wants to farm in and go straight to a well, we're very open to that conversation as well.
yeah,
Um, but we're in a better place. We've got security of tenure over the license. We've got more people in data room than ever before. We've had parties come through it and sign off on it.
yeah,
We just have to stay in the game long enough to make sure that those stars align, the right time, the right sentiment, bit of luck, and we'll get there.
yeah. You've sort of answered it, I think, in what you've just said. But obviously, the reality is your share price is on the floor at the moment.
Yeah.
You've taken a lot of criticism, I think, personally, and the company has. There have been some historic, difficulties and issues that have come up. But what do you see then coming that will now turn the ship around, if you like,
Yeah.
and get you back in play?
Look, we've taken a lot of criticism. Some of it's fair, some of it I thought was unfair, but that's the nature of criticism. The circumstances we found ourselves in with Jamaica, a lot of it was out of our control. What we had to do was to survive. Um, and sometimes even I think to myself, bloody hell, how the hell did we manage to survive and stay in the game? But we did. Did we get every decision right subsequently? No, but hindsight's 2020. You make the best decisions you can with the information you have available to you at that time. So yeah, look, there's things we could have done better. There's no question about that. But we're still alive. We're still in the game. The real focus for us in terms of rebuilding, because that's what we have to do now, is rebuild. We got to rebuild the company. We got to rebuild shareholder trust. Um, and the way to do that is by delivering. It's very simple. I go back to the beginning of the year, and I three clear deliverables. One was, get the balance sheet into a state where we could survive, and we did that. And get our cost base sustainable. Well, we've done that. The next thing was get the license extension so that we had clear runway and time. Because,
Mm.
as I say to my team all the time, if you can give me time, I'll get us options. If I've no time, I can't get options. Get me time and I'll create options for us. So we've got the time secured and we're creating options in terms of potential partners. And then the third key deliverable, which is the most important one of all of them, but cannot be achieved without the other two. But the third key deliverable is getting this partner. Now, the only thing I'm focused on now, from now till the end of the year, or until it gets done, is a partner. That's the only thing I'm working on. Somebody mentioned to me some industry news last week, which I hadn't even heard because I've just been head down,
Yeah.
focused solely on this because that is, we just got to get this done. It has
Yeah,
all
it's
of
your
my attention.
lifeline, essentially. It's the company's
It's our
lifeline.
lifeline, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No,
Yeah.
we were very clear to our shareholders
Yeah.
at the end of last year. We put out a circular on the back of a capital raise. We were very, very clear. Like we need this license. This is our lifeline. I will get this done. I will get
Yeah.
this farm out. I'm determined. We will get this
Okay.
done.
Yeah. Okay, Brian. Well, thanks very much for joining us today and giving us, a detailed breakdown of, where things are at. Good luck with the farming discussions, and hopefully we'll be talking again in the near future.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks, Sam.